Hello and welcome to another video. In this we'll be discussing about what is object oriented programming. So what exactly is object oriented programming? It is the method by which we write programs which has data and functions combined together in the form of classes and objects rather than just procedurally following the logic of the program. It focuses mostly on the four main pillars of object-oriented programming, which we'll be discussing in the later slides. But first, we need to understand what's the difference between procedural programming and object-oriented programming. So the first difference would be object-oriented programming is a bottom-up approach and procedural-oriented programming is a top-down approach. So what is bottom-up and top-down? So bottom-up is basically when you have the answer, when you have something that is of a very broader level and then you condense it to a higher level of understanding, to a smaller object of attention. Now that would be a bottom up approach. A top down approach would be something that when you start from a smaller level of understanding and then you dig deeper and deeper and get to the broader level of understanding. Now that is a top down approach, and the program is divided into objects in terms of object oriented programming, and the program is divided into functions in terms of procedural oriented programming. Object-oriented programming has a very unique feature called the access modifiers, which restrict the amount of access given to the user when it comes to data, right? So there are three types of access modifiers: public, private, and protected. So with the meaning itself, we can make out that public is something that is available to everyone, private is something that is not available, and protected is somewhere in between those two with restricted access. But procedural oriented programming does not have access modifiers, and hence data privacy can be an issue there. In object oriented programming, that is why the data is more secure, and in procedural oriented programming, since we do not have access modifiers, it is less secure. In object oriented programming, objects move freely within member functions, which means if we are using functions inside a class or an object, we can freely use it using these access modifiers, using inheritance and other properties of object oriented programming that we'll be seeing later. But in procedural oriented programming, data movement between functions is highly restricted and is highly contained within the function because of something called a scope. We have already seen what a scope of a variable is in the previous videos. The next point would be object-oriented programming supports inheritance, and procedural oriented programming does not support inheritance. So what is inheritance? We'll see in the further slides. So in object-oriented programming, there are basically four pillars that are the strong foundation of this concept. The first thing would be inheritance. Inheritance generally means when you are trying to transfer a characters of one particular type of object into another, but making very small and minor changes and reusing it again. Now this would be an example of inheritance. If you see the picture that is given here, let's say bike and vehicle are two different objects, and bike is something that is inherited from vehicle. Bike is also a vehicle, but bike has some special features which makes it unique as a bike, right? So let's say there is another object, say car. Even that is a child of the class vehicle. Now there is a difference between bike and car, but their parent is same, that is the class vehicle. Now that is called inheritance. The next thing would be seeing is polymorphism. So polymorphism is a concept by which one object can be interpreted or can manifest itself in many forms. Now that is the meaning of polymorphism. And data abstraction. So abstraction is nothing but showing only the necessary details and hiding all the background data and functions to the user. So that makes the program much more clearer and easy to access and modify, and also it helps to restrict our accesses. So that is called data abstraction. And the next thing is called encapsulation. Data encapsulation is nothing but taking some data, clubbing it and calling it under one name so that all the relevant data stays within the range of where you want it to be. So that is called data encapsulation, and this is done by the use of classes and objects. So inside a class and object, we have a lot of functions, we have a lot of variables. Those functions and variables can all be accessed just using the object name. So all this data are clubbed under one single unit, hence it is called encapsulation. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we'll see you in the next one.